Oh, hello. How you doing? Good, good. I'm also good. I'm pretty, staying alive. In case you haven't noticed, I am in a different setting. Ooh, musical chairs. No, I actually moved back to Brooklyn this week. I was planning to move back at some point, and lo and behold, it finally happened, and here I am. A few things. If you hear someone else rustling in the background, it's probably my brother or our two cats. Yes, Jake has a cat too, and he is also adorable. Any newcomers, hello, welcome. Thank you for subscribing. If you're not subscribed, how about you press that button over there? We're going to be talking about one of the most prolific murders that has happened in American history, and yes, this was made into a musical. We'll talk about that next week. But for this week, I want to focus on the history, the true story, give you all the facts before we focus on the creation of the musical that happened later on. This is probably the first video that I've done that I really procrastinated really hard on, mainly because trying to get the information for this was draining and also in a way difficult. Ironically enough, the two sites that you would assume that you can look for information are not that unbiased per se. There's a website called Little Mary Phagan, I believe is the name of it. I clicked on the link and immediately X'd out because it is run by an ancestor of Mary Phagan. When you look up Leo Frank, you are either going to be led to leofrank.org or leofrank.info, and they happen to be run by neo-Nazi white supremacists. So couldn't use that either. I have decided to mainly use Wikipedia for this. I made sure that the resources were reliable, and thankfully they are. Hi there, future me here. I also want to note that I did my best to try to be unbiased during this. I want to give you the facts, straight information, but dang, this case is so frustrating. You're gonna see what I mean, but oh man, trying to hold my tongue. So without further ado, I'm just gonna get into it because if I don't do this now, I don't think this video will ever come out. So let's get into it. Mary Phagan was born on June 1st, 1899. Her father passed away before she was born, and shortly after her birth, her mother moved the family back to their hometown of Marietta, Georgia. They found themselves moving to the Atlanta area for work. Mary actually left school at the age of 10 to work for her family. At this time in American history, child labor was a very big thing, especially in Atlanta. In 1912, her mother remarried and they moved into the city of Atlanta. And then that spring of 1912, Mary took a job at the National Pencil Company where she earned 10 cents an hour. She worked 55 hours per week. This company was run by Leo Frank. Leo Frank was born in Texas on April 17th, 1884, and his family moved to Brooklyn a few months after he was born. He attended New York City public schools and graduated from Pratt Institute in 1902. He then attended Cornell University where he studied mechanical engineering, and in 1906, he worked briefly as a draftsman and as a testing engineer. In October of 1907, Leo was invited by his uncle Moses to meet a group of investors for a position at the National Pencil Company, in which his uncle was a shareholder of. Frank accepted the position. He even went to Germany to study manufacturing pencils, and after 9 months, Frank returned to the United States and started working there in August of 1908. While he was in Atlanta, he was introduced to Lucille Seelig. They married in November 1910. It was an arranged marriage. Now, I also need to mention that Leo Frank is Jewish, and according to historians, anti-Semitism wasn't really that exposed, I guess is the word I would say, but the fact that he was Jewish and also from Brooklyn were two big negatives against him, meaning he was different, we don't like him. Due to a materials shortage, Mary was laid off on April 21st of 1913. On April 26th, around noon, she went to the factory to claim her pay. Shortly before 3 a.m. the next day, Newt Lee, the factory night's watchman, discovered Phagan's body in the rear of the basement near an incinerator and called the police. There was a trail of footprints in the basement, but due to how the police investigators improperly investigated the scene of the crime, they were never identified. There were also 2 notes found by Mary. They basically insinuated that that a black man did the murder. There was also the phrase night witch, which they believed to mean night watch, and Lee blurted out when they saw the notes, it looks like that they're trying to lay it on me. So surprise, surprise, they immediately arrest him right then and there. Another reason why they arrested Newt Lee is because when they approached the body, they thought it was a black girl that got murdered, but Lee said that it was a white girl. The reason why the police investigators thought it was a black girl was due to the amount of dirt and ashes all over her body. These police are doing great! A friend of Mary's was also arrested for the crime, but they gradually realized that these two were not the culprits. After discovering Mary's body, Newt Lee and the police both tried to contact Frank, but to no avail. This was around 4 a.m. in the morning. The police contacted him again, asking if they could come by. They arrived at around 7 a.m. They did not give him any specifics of what occurred. According to the police, they say that Frank seemed extremely nervous, trembling, and pale. His voice was hoarse, and he was rubbing his hands and asking questions before the police could answer. Frank said that he was not familiar with the name of Mary Phagan, but he would need to check his payroll book to make sure. On Monday, April 28th, Frank gave a written deposition to the police that provided a brief timeline of his activities on that Saturday. He said that Mary was in his office between 12:05 and 12:10, that Lee had arrived at 4 but was asked to return later, and that Frank had a confrontation with an ex-employee at 6 p.m. as Frank was leaving and Lee arriving. Frank also explained that Lee was supposed to punch in every half hour during his shifts, but for Sunday morning, it had several gaps. Frank also exposed his body to demonstrate that he had no cuts or injuries, and the police also found no blood in the suit that Frank said he had worn on Saturday. They also didn't find any blood stains on the laundry at Frank's house. On Tuesday, April 29th, Detective John Black went to Newt Lee's residence at 11 a.m. and found a blood-smeared shirt at the bottom of a burn barrel. The blood was smeared high up on the armpits, and the shirt smelled unused, and so the police believed that this was planted. As earlier said, Black is very suspicious of Frank, and so he believes that Frank arranged this plant. That day, Frank was arrested around 11 a.m. at the factory. The police were also convinced that Lee was involved as Frank's accomplice, and that Frank was trying to implicate him as the murderer. On Wednesday, April 30th, Frank testified about his activities on Saturday, and he had witnesses that could corroborate with it. A young man said that Mary had complained to him about Frank, and several former employees spoke of Frank flirting with other women. One said she was actually propositioned. At this point, this is all just hearsay. The detectives do admit that they have no conclusive evidence or clues at this point. Now enters Jim Conley. Jim Conley is the factory's janitor, and he was arrested on May 1st after he had been seen washing red stains out of a blue work shirt. Conley explained that it was rust, so when the detectives examined it for blood, they came to that determination as well. Conley changes his story quite a bit. Originally, he says that he wasn't at the factory, then they find out that he was due to a witness. Then he states that he can't read or write, which was also claimed to be false. They even tested his handwriting, and they were convinced that he was the one who wrote the murder notes. Specifically, he wrote night watchman as night witch. He was detained for 2 weeks, and he created 4 statements, all of them different. In his 4th affidavit, he said that Frank told him that a girl fell and hit her head against something, and that he and Frank took the body to the basement via the elevator, then returned to Frank's office where the murder notes were dictated. Now, also during this time, media coverage was a big thing. They basically painted Frank as a pervert who was trying to pursue young girls. The town was also craving justice for this murder, and they wanted justice to be done and quick. And since they had Leo already attainted, just wrong place, wrong time. On July 28th, 1913, Leo's Frank's trial begins. So the prosecution gives their case to the jury that Leo Frank killed Mary and got Conley to help him get rid of the body, as well as make him dictate the notes to try to pin it on Newt Lee. They also painted Conley and Lee in a way that since they're 2 black men, that means that they're not intelligent enough to be able to get away with such a complicated crime. Now, for the defense, they focused on their theory that Conley murdered Mary in a robbery and took her purse, which was not found at the scene of the crime. Before the trial, Conley denied seeing a purse, but at court, he says that he saw Frank put the purse in his office safe. Another witness testified that on the Monday after the murder, the safe was open and no purse was in there. Okay, now we're gonna get into one of the toughest touching moments of this trial, which is the allegations of Frank's sexual behavior towards young girls at the factory. The prosecution alleges that Frank, with Conley's assistance, regularly met with women in his office for sexual relations. On the day of the murder, Conley said he saw Phagan go upstairs from where he heard a scream coming shortly after. He then said he dozed off. When he woke up, Frank called him upstairs and showed him Phagan's body, admitting that he had hurt her. He and Frank took Mary's body to the basement via the elevator before returning in the elevator to the office where Frank dictated the murder notes. The defense called a good number of factory girls who stated that they'd never seen Frank flirting with or touching other girls, and they considered him to be a good character. For the prosecution, they called in a steady parade of former factory workers and asked them the question, do you know Mr. Frank's character of lasciviousness? And the answer back would be bad. When it comes to the timeline of the murder itself, it is seen pretty easily that Leo did not do this murder based on the timeline. What the prosecution was working with was kind of BS because according to the analysis of stomach contents, Mary died between noon and 12:15. However, a testimony indicated that Mary exited the trolley car that she was on between 12:07 and 12:10 from the stop that was about a 2 to 4 minute walk from the pencil factory. So like, even with that, it's just already a hot freaking mess trying to figure out what the timeline was with everything. So it showed that it was basically impossible for Leo to even try to do this murder within the allotted time, and also cooperating with other witnesses. On August 25th, 1913, after less than 4 hours of deliberation, the jury reached a unanimous verdict of guilty, convicting Frank of murder. The day after, Judge Rowan sentenced Leo Frank to death by hanging, with the date set to October 10th. So, okay, so what happens afterwards is basically a long process of appeals. And I believe due to these appeals, that leads to his death sentence being pushed back many a times. Interestingly enough, on October 31st, 1913, Judge Rowan says, I have thought about this case more than any other I have ever tried. With all the thought I have put on this case, I am not thoroughly convinced that Frank is guilty or innocent. After trying both state and federal appeals and being denied, Frank's team decides to try to get a commutation of sentence. So on April 22nd, 1915, an application for a commutation of Frank's death sentence was submitted. It was first sent to a 3-person prison commission in Georgia. It was rejected on June 9th by a vote of 2-1, but then it was passed to Governor George Slayton. June 12th, 1915 is when Slayton opened hearings. He received presentations from both sides with new arguments and evidence. Slayton also visited the crime scene and reviewed over 10,000 pages of documents. This included many letters, including one written by George Rowan shortly before he died, asking Slayton to correct his mistake. Slayton also received over 1,000 death threats. Yes? What's up? Slayton produces a report in which, while reading it, you believe that he's going to say that he believes that Frank is guilty, but then he switches it at the very end, asking the rhetorical question, did Jim Conley speak the truth? This is based on the inconsistencies he discovered in Jim Conley's narrative. This is a mix of the transportation of Mary's body, the murder notes, the timing of the murder, and the physical evidence. And then on Monday, June 21st, 1915, Slayton released the order to commute Frank's murder conviction to life imprisonment, which was huge. Some people rejoiced. Most people in Atlanta were not happy about this. The public was outraged. There was even an angry mob at Slayton's home. To keep Frank protected, they moved him to the Milledgeville State Penitentiary, sorry if I messed up that word, the night before the announcement was made. However, this kind of backfired because on July 17th, the New York Times reported that a fellow inmate tried to kill Frank by slashing his throat. The attacker told the authorities he wanted to keep the other inmates safe from mob violence. Frank's presence was a disgrace to the prison, and he was sure he would be pardoned if he killed Frank. So, as I said many a time in this video, a lot of people were pissed with this result, which actually led to a group of men calling themselves the Knights of Mary Phagan, and they created a plan to kidnap Frank from prison, and they were incredibly open about this to the public. This consisted of 28 men with various skills. On the night of August 16th, 1915, this group of men went to the prison where Frank was being held. They arrived around 10 p.m. and they cut the telephone wires, drained the gas from the prison's automobiles, handcuffed the warden, seized Frank, and drove away. They took a 7-hour drive to Marietta. As a reminder, is the hometown of Mary Phagan. When they arrived at the location, a rope and table were supplied by this former sheriff. Frank was handcuffed, his legs tied at his ankles, and he was hanged from a branch of a tree at around 7 in the morning of August 17th, facing the direction of the house where Mary had lived. Crowds of people came to witness it. There were photographs taken of him being hung. People wanted to cut his body into pieces, but somehow they decided to be good Samaritans and give the body back intact to the family. His body was buried in the Mount Carmel Cemetery in Queens, New York, on August 20th, 1915. If you need a moment to breathe, feel free to pause and take a minute. I'm gonna need to do that too. Fast forward a few years. In 1982, a man named Alonzo Mann, who had been Frank's office boy at the time of Mary Phagan's murder, stated that he had seen Jim Conley alone shortly after noon carrying Phagan's body through the lobby toward the ladder descending into the basement. He was told by Conley, "If you tell anyone about this, I'll kill you." He went home and told his mother about it, and she advised him not to say anything. This led to an attempt to get a posthumous pardon for Frank. Unfortunately, since there was no solid evidence to show Leo Frank was innocent or guilty, they denied the pardon. However, in 1986, the Georgia State Board granted a pardon to Leo Frank to recognize its culpability over his death. To this day, the murder of Mary Phagan is still unsolved. Many people still believe Leo Frank did it. Many people believe Jim Conley did it. There are even witnesses that have attested that Jim Conley did confess that he did murder Mary Phagan later in his life. What's really unfortunate is that due to anti-Semitism and blatant racism, it completely looked over the fact that a young girl was brutally murdered, possibly assaulted, and justice wasn't brought to her. To try to end this on a nice note, that was Atlanta, Georgia in 1915. Georgia made history of electing their first black senator and their first Jewish senator into office. And I think, regardless of what party you're a part of, I think that's amazing, and that is a huge step, especially for Georgia, and it gives me hope. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked this, please leave a like, leave a comment, let me know what you think about it. And as always, if you'd like me to talk about something in the musical theater realm, leave a comment down below. Be nice in the comments, don't be a fun ruiner. I will see you guys next week to talk about, may you be happy, may you be healthy, may you be safe and at ease and free from harm, and I will see you guys next week.
You want to say hi to your fans?
Nah, 下班中吧。